The sound of splintering would cut through the calm of an early Saturday morning. It wasn't the sound of someone trimming a fence or fixing a porch. It was deeper, angrier. It was the roar of a tractor chewing through freshly laid walls. Neighbors on Willow Creek Lane came rushing out of their homes, coffee cups in hand, slippers scuffing the asphalt. At the center of the chaos was Henry Calhoun, a 72-year-old retired farmer, sitting high in the seat of his rusty red tractor. His face was calm, almost too calm, as he tore into the wooden frame of what had been, only yesterday, the start of a new house foundation. And screaming from the driveway, waving her hands like someone trying to stop an oncoming train, was Patricia Whitmore, 59, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. "You're destroying community property," she shouted, voice cracking with rage. Henry didn't answer. The engine drowned her out. Within seconds, the structure collapsed into a pile of shattered boards and dust. By the time the police arrived, half the neighborhood was filming, and the rest were arguing. Some said Henry had lost his mind. Others whispered that maybe he'd finally had enough. But no one could have guessed what the investigation would reveal, that the so-called community project Patricia had started wasn't just a violation of HOA rules. It was part of a personal vendetta decades in the making. Willow Creek, Texas, wasn't the kind of place you saw on postcards anymore. It was a small, sun-bleached community about 20 minutes south of Fort Worth, a patchwork of modest homes, stubborn pride, and memories that stretched back to when farmland still surrounded the town. When the HOAs began popping up in the early 2000s, most of the older residents resisted the idea. They didn't want rules telling them how high their grass should be or what color mailbox they could have. But change crept in quietly like weeds. In 2009, Patricia and her husband, Richard Whitmore, bought one of the larger corner houses on Willow Creek Lane. Richard was a real estate consultant. Patricia, a retired school principal with a voice that could silence a cafeteria from 50 feet away. It wasn't long before she became the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards. And Henry Calhoun? He was everything Patricia disapproved of: old, independent, unbothered by HOA newsletters, and not the kind of man who asked permission to do anything on his own land. Henry Calhoun's house sat on the oldest parcel in the neighborhood, Lot 7, a 2-acre property with a small farmhouse, a tin shed, and a front porch that had seen 1,000 sunsets. He'd lived there since 1973, back when the road wasn't even paved. He'd raised 3 children, buried 1 wife, and outlived most of the neighbors who used to call him Mr. Cow. Henry had worked his whole life in agriculture, 40 years on a local cotton farm, until his body began to give out. But even in retirement, he kept busy. He repaired old tractors, grew vegetables for the local food bank, and still mowed his own lawn with pride. He was quiet, the kind of man who said little but saw everything. And in a neighborhood obsessed with modern appearances, that quiet confidence made Patricia uneasy. She once complained at an HOA meeting that his old barn was an eyesore. Henry had smiled, leaned on his cane, and replied, "That barn's older than your whole board, ma'am." And she's still standing that. Everyone laughed, except Patricia. In April 2024, Patricia announced what she called a beautification initiative. The HOA, she said, will be building a community gazebo and storage unit to enhance property values. But there was one problem. The site she selected sat partly inside Henry's property line, a boundary that had never been disputed in 50 years. Henry found out when he woke one morning to the sound of a backhoe in his yard. He walked out in his overalls, coffee mug in hand, and asked the workers who had authorized the digging. They pointed toward a woman in a sun hat, holding a clipboard. "Patricia, you're trespassing," Henry said calmly. Patricia didn't even look up. "We're building for the community, Mr. Calhoun. You should be grateful." Henry frowned. "Grateful's a word you earn. You don't build on another man's land." Patricia waved him off. "The HOA has jurisdiction over all shared spaces. Ain't nothing shared about this," Henry said. "This is mine." But the work didn't stop. By evening, wooden posts stood planted deep into his soil, the first bones of a gazebo that would ignite a war. Henry wasn't the kind of man who believed in lawyers. He believed in common sense and fences. So he did what any old farmer would do. He measured his land himself. He dug out the original deed from a metal lockbox in his shed, laid it on his kitchen table, and cross-checked every boundary marker. The results were crystal clear. The HOA's construction had crossed 3 feet into his property. The next morning, Henry walked to the HOA office with the document in hand. He placed it on Patricia's desk and said, "You're building on my soil. Move it." Patricia's response was as icy as her blue eyes. "You can't prove that, Mr. Calhoun." The board voted unanimously to proceed. Henry smiled that small, tired smile of his. "Then I reckon you'll have to answer for what happens next." She thought he was bluffing. She didn't know Henry had already called the county surveyor, or that he still had a working John Deere 4455 tractor behind his barn. Saturday, May 11th, 2024. It started like any other morning. Birds chirping, lawnmowers buzzing faintly down the block. At 7:30 a.m., Patricia arrived with her clipboard and a fresh cup of coffee, ready to oversee the second phase of construction. By 7:35, Henry's tractor engine roared to life. The machine's growl echoed across Willow Creek. Neighbors stepped onto their porches as Henry rolled forward, slow and deliberate, his hat casting a shadow across his face. Patricia waved her arms frantically. "Henry, stop this right now. I'll have you arrested." He didn't respond. The tractor's front loader pushed through the unfinished frame, splintering beams like matchsticks. Boards snapped, nails screamed, and the half-built gazebo collapsed in a puff of dust. Someone screamed. Someone else cheered. By the time it was over, Henry sat there motionless, breathing heavy. Then he turned off the engine, climbed down, and said quietly, "You build something on a man's land, you best be ready to lose it." Police arrived within minutes, Officer Derek Sanders among them. He knew Henry. Everyone did. But today, Sanders' tone was careful, official. "Mr. Calhoun, I need you to step aside while we assess the scene." Patricia was hysterical, pacing back and forth. He destroyed HOA property. That was for the community. He's dangerous. Henry didn't argue. He simply handed Sanders a deed and said, "Check the county map, son. Then tell me who's trespassing." Sanders took the papers, frowned, and radio dispatched to verify the coordinates. Minutes later, confirmation came through. Henry Calhoun was right. The gazebo had indeed been built 3 feet onto his land. The officer sighed. Technically, Mr. Calhoun acted within his property rights. Patricia exploded. "That's absurd. He destroyed a community project." Sanders looked at her evenly. "Ma'am, you built it on private property without consent." The crowd murmured. Cameras flashed. And in that moment, Patricia realized the neighborhood she ruled by fear was watching her unravel. By Monday, the video of Henry demolishing the structure had gone viral. Elderly man destroys HOA gazebo with tractor, wins case. Headlines flooded social media. But the HOA wasn't finished. Patricia filed a civil lawsuit for destruction of community property, demanding $48,000 in damages. Henry's lawyer, a young public defender named Rachel Nguyen, saw through the bluff immediately. She countersued for trespass and harassment, citing HOA overreach and emotional distress. The case caught local news attention. Interviews, editorials, hashtags. Everyone had an opinion. Some painted Henry as a hero standing up to tyranny. Others called him reckless and unhinged. But then, something odd happened. A local surveyor came forward anonymously, claiming he'd been pressured by the HOA to adjust the original property lines. The plot thickened. Rachel and Gwen filed a motion demanding access to HOA construction permits and survey maps. The HOA's lawyer resisted, until a court order forced disclosure. When the document arrived, Rachel noticed inconsistencies. The map signatures didn't match county records, and the approval stamp dated April 10th, 2 weeks before the supposed HOA vote. She dug deeper. Turns out, Patricia had filed the permits herself using her husband's company name, Whitmore Realty Consulting, effectively authorizing her own construction without full board approval. That wasn't just unethical. It was fraud. When confronted in court, Patricia tried to maintain her composure. "I was acting in the best interest of the community," she said, voice trembling. "Mr. Calhoun's lot was underutilized, and we thought—" Rachel cut her off. "You thought you could take What didn't belong to you? The judge raised an eyebrow, and from the back of the courtroom, a quiet cheer rose, the sound of neighbors who'd spent years under Patricia's thumb. The case adjourned for further review. Patricia stormed out, glaring daggers at Henry, who sat silently, hands folded, that same calm smile on his face. But beneath that calm was something deeper, because Henry had discovered something else in those documents. Something that hinted this wasn't the first time Patricia had manipulated land deeds in Willow Creek. While waiting for trial, Henry and Rachel combed through county archives. They discovered that over the past 8 years, 3 other residents had mysteriously lost small slivers of property to the HOA, each adjustment signed off by the same notary, Eleanor Pike. But Eleanor had died 5 years earlier. It was clear now. Patricia had been quietly absorbing private land to expand community spaces, boosting HOA influence and property value for her husband's development deals. Henry wasn't just defending his yard. He had exposed a web of corruption stretching back a decade. The neighborhood split into factions. Some rallied behind Henry, calling themselves the Free Lots. Others sided with Patricia, insisting the HOA was just doing its job. Late-night arguments echoed down Willow Creek. Old friends stopped speaking. And one morning, someone spray-painted Old Man Tyrant across Henry's barn. That night, he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the paint dry in the moonlight. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. "People forget what land means," he murmured. "Ain't about dirt. It's about dignity." On a quiet Tuesday, Officer Sanders called Henry. "Mr. Calhoun, we've got a problem," he said. "Patricia's claiming new evidence. Says your deed is outdated." Henry laughed softly. "Outdated? Land don't expire, son." But when Sanders arrived with a copy, Henry's smile faded. The HOA's lawyer had submitted a forged deed showing a different boundary, one that excluded a 3-foot strip of land. Only this time, the forgery was perfect. The next morning, construction resumed. Workers arrived before dawn, rebuilding the gazebo, this time under police watch. Henry watched from his porch, silent. Rachel called, pleading with him not to do anything rash. He didn't answer. He simply looked toward his barn, where his old red tractor sat waiting. The camera caught him later that evening, stepping onto porch, hat in hand, looking straight ahead. "If they want another fight," he said softly, "they'll get one." The engine roared to life again, and the ground began to shake. By the time the dust settled from Henry Calhoun's tractor protest, Willow Creek Lane looked like a war zone that refused to forget. The broken board from Patricia Whitmore's half-rebuilt gazebo still littered the lot. Someone had put up yellow caution tape, but the neighborhood children used it as jump rope string. Every evening, Henry sat on his porch swing, watching the sun bleed into the cotton fields beyond the subdivision. He should have felt vindicated. He'd proven the land was his, but instead he felt watched. Cars slowed when they passed his gate. The HOA newsletter no longer mentioned his name, but thinly veiled phrases, certain residents who endanger community harmony, made sure everyone knew exactly who the villain was supposed to be. Inside City Hall, the case file had swollen to several inches thick. Officer Derek Sanders tried to keep it straight, but new evidence seemed to appear every week, usually delivered by Patricia's lawyer in shiny black folders that smelled of toner and arrogance. Rachel Nguyen, Henry's young attorney, found the first hint of forgery late one night. She was cross-referencing property plats when she noticed something odd. The county stamp on the new corrected deed was too clean. The ink didn't feather into the paper fibers the way authentic stamps did. She drove to the records office first thing the next morning. The clerk on duty, a graying man named Walt Benson, frowned when she handed him the document. "That's not our stamp," he said flatly. "You sure?" Rachel asked. "Positive. Ours says County of Travis Land Registry. This one says Travis Land Office Authority. We haven't used that name in 40 years. Someone had built an entirely fake department to legitimize Patricia's new claim. Rachel photographed everything and sent the images to Sanders. He called her 30 minutes later. "You're telling me the HOA forged a government seal?" "I'm telling you someone with access to professional equipment did," she replied. "And if they can fake that, they can fake a whole chain of ownership." Patricia Whitmore didn't come to the next HOA meeting. She hosted it. on the same disputed patch of land. Folding chairs, lemonade, the smell of fresh-cut lumber. As neighbors gathered, construction workers quietly hammered a new wooden platform behind her. She stepped up, pastel cardigan crisp, smile weaponized. "I want to assure everyone that the confusion regarding Lot 7 has been resolved," she announced. "The association holds full easement rights. Mr. Calhoun's objections have been reviewed and found baseless." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Henry, sitting near the back, clenched his cane until his knuckles whitened. Rachel whispered, "She's testing you. Don't bite." But Henry stood anyway. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you can put lipstick on a lie, but it's still a lie." Phones came up recording. Patricia's smile didn't waver. "Then you won't mind if we finish construction tomorrow." That night, thunder rolled in from plains. Around midnight, Henry's dogs began barking. He stepped onto his porch with a flashlight. The beam caught movement near his fence. Someone in a hoodie, crouching by the property marker. "Hey!" Henry shouted. The figure bolted toward a dark SUV idling on the road. Tires screeched. The vehicle vanished into the rain. When Sanders examined the area the next morning, he found the survey stakes yanked out and replaced with new ones, painted bright orange, positioned several feet deeper into Henry's yard. "They're moving the line in the dead of night," Sanders muttered. "That's not arrogance, that's panic." A week later, Sanders received a call from a man who claimed to be an independent land auditor offering to clarify the situation. Name, Edward Sloan. The moment Sanders heard the voice, he felt a chill. Sloan had once audited city police budgets, always walking the fine edge between consultant and enforcer. Sloan arrived at the precinct in a charcoal suit that repelled the Texas dust-like armor. He carried a slim folder. The HOA acted within delegated municipal authority, Sloan said. "Delegated by who?" Sanders asked. "By entities above your pay grade, officer." Sloan slid a document across the desk. A memorandum with the state seal and Patricia Whitmore's signature beneath it. "You're looking at a public-private partnership agreement," Sloan said smoothly. "Willow Creek's HOA now operates under community development jurisdiction. That gives them limited eminent domain rights." Sanders stared at the paper. If it was genuine, the HOA could legally claim slices of private property in the name of beautification. "You're playing God with people's homes," Sanders said. "Not God," Sloan replied. "Just governance." 3 nights later, someone broke into Rachel and Wen's small law office downtown. The thief didn't take computers or cash, only the Calhoun versus Willow Creek HOA case file. When police arrived, they found a calling card, a pristine business envelope embossed with SR Auditing Group, Sloan's parent company. Inside, one sentence typed in courier font: "Cease representation or face disbarment proceedings." Rachel refused to back down. She duplicated every file, uploaded copies to cloud servers, and called Henry. "They're scared," she said. "That means we're close." Among the residents siding with Patricia was a quiet middle-aged man named Gerald Pike, son of the deceased notary, whose seal had appeared on multiple fraudulent deeds. When Sanders questioned him, Gerald shifted nervously. "Mom notarized a lot of papers for Patricia back in the day," he said. "Even after she passed?" Sanders asked. Gerald froze. "I don't know anything about that." Later that night, Sanders received a voicemail from an unknown number. "You're digging too deep, officer. People in this town don't want the truth, they want quiet." The line clicked dead. On June 9th, smoke rose behind Henry's property. By the time firefighters arrived, his old storage shed was gone, along with his tractor. Patricia appeared on local TV the next morning, expressing concern for community safety. "This is what happens when individuals escalate," she said sweetly. But Sanders noticed her mistake. She mentioned the tractor's model and serial number, details never released publicly. Someone close to the investigation was feeding her information. Henry stood in the ashes, hat in hand. "That machine's been with me 40 years, he said quietly. "Guess they couldn't win on paper, so they used fire." 2 days later, Henry received a certified letter from his insurer canceling his policy due to rezoning. The document bore the same fake county seal Rachel had uncovered. Without insurance, the county could declare his property unsafe for habitation. It was legal suffocation, paperwork warfare. Rachel drafted an emergency injunction. Sanders gathered witness statements. But every time they tried to file, new bureaucracy appeared. Entire departments, Planning Integrity Office, Residential Oversight Board, names no one had heard of, rejected their forms. They're building fake government inside real government, Rachel said, and we can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Help came from an unexpected source. Claire Jennings, a nervous HOA secretary with freckles and auburn hair, showed up at Rachel's office with a flash drive. I can't sleep anymore, she said, trembling. They made me file false minutes. The board never voted on any of the projects. Patricia and her husband handled everything themselves. The files included internal emails between Patricia and Sloan discussing acquisitions, liquidation of resistance, and a line that made Rachel's skin crawl. Phase 2 requires complete neutralization of Calhoun assets before audit closure. Neutralization. A word that didn't belong in neighborhood politics. Armed with the whistleblower data, Sanders obtained a warrant for Patricia Whitmore's arrest on charges of fraud and arson conspiracy. He led the raid himself. Patricia didn't resist. She merely smiled as they handcuffed her in front of her perfectly manicured roses. You think this ends with me? She said. You don't even know whose land you're standing on. In her purse, investigators found a flash drive identical to Claire's, but when they plugged it in, it was blank. Wiped clean. That night, Richard Whitmore vanished. His car was found abandoned near the interstate. In the trunk, police discovered shredded documents bearing the SR Auditing Group logo. A search of his home office revealed something stranger. Aerial photos of multiple neighborhoods across Texas, each with red circles marking old minority-owned lots. Rachel realized the Calhoun case wasn't isolated. It was a template. During Patricia's preliminary hearing, Sloan himself appeared as her legal consultant. He presented a notarized transfer proving the land under Henry's house had been sold to SR Auditing Group 2 days earlier. Henry rose from the bench, trembling. I never sold my land. Sloan smiled thinly. The documents say otherwise. Rachel demanded to see the signature. When the clerk enlarged the screen, gasps filled courtroom. The signature looked authentic, but beside it was a faint digital watermark. E. Pike Notary Seal 2002. The same dead woman again. The judge ordered a forensic handwriting review, delaying the case 2 weeks. Sloan turned to Sanders as they exited the courtroom. Enjoy your victory lap, officer. It's your last. 2 nights later, Sanders' patrol car was sideswiped on a rural road. He survived, bruised and bleeding, but when investigators examined the wreck, they found the other vehicle registered to a shell company, Whitmore Development LLC, dissolved 3 months prior. Someone was cleaning up loose ends, one by one. While Sanders recovered, Henry disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, a new tractor followed him, a massive green John Deere Series 9, gleaming under the morning sun. Bought her off a friend in Abilene, he said simply. Neighbors whispered that he was planning another demolition. Rachel tried to dissuade him. Let the courts handle it. Courts are paper, Henry replied. I deal in dirt. That afternoon, construction crews arrived again, this time not for a gazebo but for a community resource center. Steel beams, concrete mixers, chain-link fences, an entire building rising over his property line. Patricia might have been in jail, but someone else was giving orders. Rachel hacked into the county planning database. The blueprint for the resource center listed its project manager as Sloan Realty Holdings, subsidiary of SR Auditing Group. At the bottom of the page, a signature, Edward Sloan, acting executor. The same man who claimed to be an auditor now owned the company constructing the building. The circle was complete. Sanders visited Henry one final time before the restraining injunction hearing. If you do anything, they'll arrest you, he warned. They already stole everything worth arresting me for, Henry said. Sanders looked tired. I can't protect you if you go through with it. Henry nodded. It wasn't a skin, you two. He patted the side of his new tractor, the metal still smelling of oil and vengeance. At dawn, the rumble started again, the same mechanical growl that had once made Patricia Whitmore's gazebo crumble. Neighbors ran outside, phones in hand. Across the street, construction workers froze as Henry Calhoun's tractor rolled toward the steel frame of the half-built resource center. Officer Sanders received a dispatch at 7:12 a.m. Possible disturbance, heavy equipment operating on Willow Creek Lane. He floored the accelerator. By the time he turned the corner, dust filled the air like a storm. Through the haze, he saw the tractor silhouette, and standing in front of it, waving frantically, was Rachel and Gwen. "Henry, stop. There's fuel lines under." A blinding flash ripped through the lot. The ground trembled. Windows shattered for half a block. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, the structure was gone, and so was Henry Calhoun. Only a crater remained, smoldering under the Texas sun. The blast tore through Willow Creek Lane at 7:13 a.m. When the smoke thinned, a crater yawned where the Community Resource Center had stood. Twisted beams jutted from the soil like ribs of a carcass. A mangled green tractor lay half buried in rubble. No one saw Henry Calhoun after that morning. The county declared it an industrial accident. But for those who'd known Henry, the quiet man who wouldn't let anyone take his land, it felt like a message. Rachel and Gwen stood at the edge of the crater for hours, dust on her face, until Officer Derek Sanders placed a hand on her shoulder. "They're calling it gas line ignition," he said. "There were no gas lines under that lot," Rachel replied, and both of them knew what that meant. Someone had planned it. Search crews combed the wreckage for 2 days. They found metal fragments, burned wood, and a bent license plate reading TX, Cal 77. But no remains. No blood, no teeth, no DNA. The heat signature had been so intense that the soil beneath the crater fused into glass. That should have been impossible without military-grade thermite. Farm tractors don't explode like that, Sanders told the fire marshal. Then what did? Something that was never meant to be here. Within a week, Willow Creek turned into a circus. True crime YouTubers, local news crews, and HOA pundits camped by the yellow tape. Every headline spun a different truth. Elderly man dies in tragic explosion. Domestic terror suspect destroys HOA center. Land rights activist goes missing after government audit. Patricia Whitmore, still awaiting trial, appeared on morning TV via video link, smiling through a jailhouse uniform. "I warned everyone Mr. Calhoun was unstable," she said. "Sadly, his violence proved me right." Rachel threw a remote at the screen. "She's burying him twice." 3 weeks later, a federal forensics team took over the investigation, strangely fast for a local blast. Sanders was ordered to stand down. He snuck into the lab anyway. Inside a sealed evidence bag sat a small circular chip coated in ash. The label read, "Device Origin, SR Auditing Group Property Management Division," the same company that had backed Sloan and the HOA. The chip was a tracking beacon, military grade, which meant the explosion was triggered remotely. Late one night, Rachel received an email from an untraceable address. Subject: "If you want the truth, come to Lot 9. She went alone. At the edge of the burn zone, a cheap battery recorder sat half buried in dirt. She pressed play. A man's hoarse voice crackled through static. "Rachel, if you're hearing this, they got to me first. Don't trust the deeds. They're fake. All of it. They're using our land for storage, underground. Find what's beneath Lot 7. It was Henry, and he sounded very much alive." Sanders and Rachel returned with ground-penetrating radar from the county engineer's office. What they found under Henry's property wasn't a gas line. It was a tunnel system, concrete shafts leading toward the old rail corridor 2 miles east. Blueprints buried in city archives revealed that decades earlier, the Army Corps of Engineers had built those tunnels for logistic storage. Recently, they'd been leased to a private contractor, Sloan Realty Holdings. "They're not after his land," Sanders said. "They're hiding something under it." Claire Jennings, the frightened secretary, dug deeper into HOA bank records and found payments to a non-existent employee named Calhoun Henry Maintenance LLC. Money flowed in and out every month. When she traced it through routing numbers, it led to a bank in Nevada used for contractor payouts by the Department of Defense. Rachel stared at the ledger. They didn't just erase him. They absorbed him into their system. Edward Sloan appeared again, this time at a press conference. polished as ever, gray eyes empty. "The incident at Willow Creek was unfortunate," he said. "But our public-private partnership continues to ensure community safety." When reporters asked about Henry Calhoun, Sloan smiled. Mr. Calhoun was a valued contractor. He completed his work and relocated out of state. He was officially alive, on paper. Rachel and Sanders looked at each other. They killed him and re-registered his identity. Sanders whispered. Now he's a ghost employee in their system. A USB arrived in Rachel's mail without a return address. Inside were folders named by towns: Sunvale, Copper Hills, Red Bluff, and finally, Willow Creek. Each contained blueprints and financial records for underground storage facilities disguised as HOA projects. Every one of them had been built beneath historically black or Latino-owned properties. It was systematic erasure through paperwork and concrete. "We're not dealing with a neighborhood scandal," Rachel said. "This is a statewide land program." 2 months after the explosion, a truck driver found a man wandering near the New Mexico border. Disoriented, burned hands, no ID. He gave one name to paramedics: Cal. Hospital records listed him as John Cal. When Rachel saw the photo, her heart stopped. The eyes were Henry's, but emptier, like someone had wiped the life from behind them. She drove 6 hours to see him. In the ICU, he stared blankly at the ceiling. "Henry, it's me." "Rachel." He turned slowly. "They said I should forget." Did I forget? A barcode was tattooed behind his ear. When Sanders searched Sloan's headquarters under a judge's order, he found a basement vault lined with filing cabinets, each drawer labeled by town and lot number. Inside were microchips like the one from the blast, each paired with a name. Calhoun Henry A. Asset status: recovered. Whitmore Richard. Asset status: deployed. Sanders snapped photos and sent them to Rachel. They're cataloging people like property. Claire Jennings vanished the next day. Her car was found parked by Lake Travis, engine running, person side. The seat held a typed note: "I lied about everything. Please leave me alone." But the signature wasn't hers. It was a digital printout of her handwriting from HOA minutes. Rachel knew the pattern by now. Sloan scrubbing witnesses. Under public pressure, the Texas Attorney General announced a state hearing on HOA ethics and land use. Sloan was subpoenaed. Rachel and Sanders prepared to testify. The night before, Sloan called Rachel directly. His voice was serene. "You're a bright woman, Ms. Nguyen. Do you really think the state will punish its own investors? You can't hide this forever." "I don't have to. We just rezone forever." He hung up. The Capitol building was packed. Rachel took the stand first, presented maps and forged seals, her voice steady but furious. Applause broke out. Then Sloan spoke. He handed the committee a folder and said, "Before we continue, perhaps you'd like to see the plaintiff's authorization." Inside was a document signed by Henry Calhoun, dated the day before the explosion, apparently granting Sloan Realty Permanent Development rights in exchange for a consulting fee. Gasps erupted. Rachel yelled, "That's a forgery. He was dead that day." Sloan smiled slightly. Was he? After the hearing, a brown envelope appeared on Sanders' desk. Inside was a USB labeled Calhoun_CM. He plugged it in. The footage showed Henry alive, filmed in a dim room, wearing a clean shirt and blank expression. Behind him hung the flag of SR Auditing Group. "I authorized Sloan Realty Holdings to manage Lot 7, he read robotically. "No one forced me." But at the end of the clip, for a fraction of a second, his eyes flicked toward the camera. Morse code: 3 short, 1 long, 1 short. SOS. Rachel and Sanders returned to Lot 7 one final time under cover of darkness. They followed the tunnel path with miners' lamps until the air smelled of fuel and rust. Deep inside, they found a massive steel door stamped Sloan Storage, authorized personnel only. Sanders forced it open. Inside were rows of servers humming quietly, labeled with names of people and addresses. At the center stood a glass capsule. Suspended within it, a man asleep under light tubes. Henry Calhoun. Alive. Breathing. A console beside the capsule displayed live data, brain activity feeds, neural mapping, and words that made Rachel's heart freeze. Project Homestead. Human ownership model simulation. Sloan wasn't just stealing land. He was turning people into digital assets, living blueprints for predictive control of neighborhood behavior. Every person erased from the deeds was a test subject. An alarm blared. Red lights filled the tunnel. Over loudspeakers, Sloane's voice echoed, calm as ever. You shouldn't have come here, Officer Sanders. Property must be secured. Doors slammed shut behind them. Rachel grabbed a fire axe, smashed the capsule control panel. Henry gasped awake, eyes wild. Run, he coughed. They wired the whole place. The floor trembled. Sirens wailed. Sanders dragged Rachel and Henry toward the exit. Flames roared down the corridor. They barely made it out as the tunnel collapsed behind them. When rescue teams arrived, there was nothing left, just a sinkhole where Lot 7 had been. Sanders and Rachel survived, but Henry vanished again in the chaos. Days later, drone footage caught a lone pickup heading into the desert. Driver unseen, but the license plate read TX Cal 77. At dawn, Rachel checked her email. A new message waited in her inbox. From Calhoun at homestead-data.net. Subject: You can't stop what's already built. Attached was a photo, a new neighborhood development. Shining under sunrise, banner reading Silver Rock Estates, managed by SR Auditing Group. In the corner of the frame, a figure stood by the entrance sign, an older man in a hat, watching quietly. Henry Calhoun, alive, again, but this time he was smiling. 3 months after the tunnel collapse, Rachel and Gwen opened her front door to find a package on the mat. No label, no return address. Inside lay a flash drive and a handwritten note. You wanted proof. Now you'll wish you hadn't. The files contained blueprints for a nationwide infrastructure plan coded as Project Homestead. The client of record, SR Auditing Group. The signature authorizing the project Childer, Henry A. Calhoun, Chief Field Advisor. Officer Derek Sanders met Rachel in a rundown motel outside Fort Stockton. They projected the files onto the wall. Each state had its own community conversion zones, targeting older landowners with ambiguous titles. Every conversion promised urban renewal. Each listed Sloan Realty Holdings as a developer and Project Homestead as its legal umbrella. They're turning HOAs into land funnels, Sanders said. And they made Henry the face of it. Rachel whispered. The final page listed a date, September 30th, national launch. A week later, Rachel received coordinates embedded in a text. 33.0472N minus 106.606W. She and Sanders drove through the New Mexico desert until they reached an abandoned airstrip. Under a hangar roof stood Henry Calhoun. Thinner, gray in the eyes, but alive. You came, he said. What did they do to you? Rachel asked. Made me see how it all fits together. Henry explained he'd been offered a deal after the explosion. Work with Sloan or watch others lose their homes. He'd chosen to go inside. They call it Homestead because it's a return of ownership, just not ours. He handed Rachel a small metal drive. This is the root code. If you publish it, they erase me for good. If you don't, they erase everyone else. Before they could leave, headlights bloomed across the desert. Black SUVs. Sanders shoved Rachel and Henry into the truck. Bullets cracked against the tailgate as they sped across the sand. Henry grimaced. They're tracking the chip in me. He pulled a knife, cut into his shoulder, and flung a tiny transponder into the dark. The pursuers veered toward it. They escaped through an old service tunnel leading to a rail spur once used for military freight. The same system Sloan had repurposed for Homestead. Following the coordinates in the drive, they found a data center beneath a decommissioned grain silo. Rows of servers throbbed with light. On each screen was a dashboard labeled Resident Behavior Predictor, SR Audit OS. Names, addresses, energy use, bank patterns. The software predicted when people might default on taxes or refuse HOA orders. Each prediction triggered an automatic property acquisition recommendation. They don't need bulldozers anymore, Henry said. They let the data do the demolition. Henry sat among the servers, hands shaking. I helped design the mapping. They needed my memory of old boundaries. That's why they kept me alive. Rachel recorded everything. You can still stop it. No, he said softly. I can only show you where to cut. He typed a command string that opened the system's core directory. Delete this and Homestead dies. But so does every record of the people they took. They'll be gone for good, legally never born. Rachel froze. Sanders looked between them. If we keep it running, they keep stealing. If we shut it down, we erase their proof of existence. Alarms howled. Sloane's team was coming. Henry pressed a drive into Rachel's hand. You have to choose for me. What will you do? Stay. Someone has to pull the plug. He smiled faintly. Tell them the tractor man finally finished his job. Rachel and Sanders ran. Behind them, light flared as Henry overrode the system. The silo shook. Servers exploded in chains of blue flame. Outside, they saw the roof collapse and a pillar of dust rise into the sunset, the same color as the soil he'd fought for. 2 weeks later, headlines hit. Whistleblower leak exposes nationwide HOA fraud ring. Government contractors linked to illegal land data program. Project Homestead terminated. Executives disappear. Edward Sloan resigned from all his positions and vanished. His assets moved offshore within hours. Patricia Whitmore pleaded guilty to fraud and served 2 years. When she was released, her home was demolished by the county for code violations. Rachel and Sanders placed a marker on Lot 7. Henry Calhoun, farmer, fighter, free man. No body was ever recovered. Sometimes locals say they hear a tractor engine late at night in the fields, a slow, steady rumble rolling under the wind. Months later, Rachel stood before a university audience, showing the files she had rescued. Henry Calhoun was not a terrorist. He was a man who understood what ownership meant. He taught us that land isn't just property, it's memory. When we let systems own our memories, we become the property. She paused. Project Homestead was built on paper, but paper can burn. The real danger is forgetting who we are once the ink dries. It started with a tractor and an old man defending his yard. It ended with a nation remembering that freedom isn't zoned, and justice isn't granted by permission slips. For every rule written to protect order, someone will try to use it to own you. The question is, how much of yourself will you sign away before you notice? Moral of the story. True ownership isn't about land titles or contracts. It's about the courage to stand when every rule says sit.